I never thought the sound of wedding bells could feel like the hammering of nails sealing a coffin, but that is exactly what I heard the moment I pushed open the grand doors of the cathedral. Everyone turned. The music stumbled. The bride froze mid-smile. And there he was, the man who had buried me alive with papers and lies, standing at the altar in a tuxedo, holding another woman's hand. He had told the world that I was gone, that my body had already turned to ashes, that he was a grieving widower who deserved another chance at love. But there I was, flesh and blood, breath in my lungs, the supposedly dead wife, standing in the light of the stained glass windows while 100 witnesses gasped as if they had seen a ghost. They had not seen a ghost. They had seen the truth walking back into the room. Do you know what it feels like to be erased while you are still alive? To see your own death notice printed in the paper, your face framed by black borders, your name followed by words of sorrow written by the very man who swore to love you until death. The betrayal is not just in the deceit. It is in the humiliation, the cold dismissal, the declaration that you are worth more dead than alive. I stood there in that church, and I felt the weight of 3 years of lies pressing down on my chest. He had claimed the insurance money. He had told the neighbors that I had lost a long battle with illness. He had even arranged a small staged funeral. And now, with the ashes of his performance still warm, he was ready to slip a ring onto another woman's finger. The guests stared at me in silence, some clutching their pearls, others whispering frantically. I could see one of his cousins, pale as a sheet, gripping her phone, already preparing to record. It was the silence before the storm. The kind of silence that precedes a thunderclap that splits the sky. My voice trembled at first, but then it found its steel. I said, "You all may wonder if I am real. I assure you I am. The woman this man declared dead is standing here alive, and I have not come to bless this union. I have come to bury a lie." Every eye returned to him, waiting for a denial, an explanation, a miracle that would absolve him. But I knew him better than anyone. I knew the way his jaw tightened when he was cornered, the way his pupils shrank when the truth closed in. He did not speak, because he knew there was no story he could spin that would erase the sight of me standing there in the flesh. Let me take you back to the moment I discovered that I was supposed to be dead. It was not a gunshot or a car crash or a sudden illness. It was a piece of paper, cold and bureaucratic, that told me my existence had been erased. I had gone to renew my identification at the city office, and the clerk, a young man with too much hair gel, looked at me with confusion. "Ma'am," he said, "there's a note here that this Social Security number belongs to a deceased person." I laughed at first, thinking it was a mistake. But then he turned the screen toward me, and there it was in stark black and white, deceased, date of death, 6 months earlier, cause prolonged illness, signed, my husband. My blood ran cold. Imagine standing there, breathing, your pulse hammering in your ears, while the government's computer insists you are a corpse. That was the first time I asked myself the question I am asking you now. What would you do if the person you trusted most declared you dead while you still walked the earth? Would you scream? Would you collapse? Would you fight? I remember stumbling out of that office, clutching my bag like a life raft. The sun was shining as if nothing had changed, as if the world had not just folded in on itself. I wanted to call him right there, to demand an answer, but something inside me warned against it. If he had gone this far, forged documents, staged lies, then confronting him without proof would be like stepping into a trap. So I kept silent and I began to dig. At night, I could not sleep. I would sit at the kitchen table, the same table where we had once shared morning coffee, where we had laughed about bills and made plans for holidays. I stared at the wood grain, tracing the lines like they could give me answers. Why had he done it? Was it only for the money, the insurance payout? Or was it something darker, a desire to erase me completely so he could start a new life unburdened. The thought twisted in my gut like a knife. The hardest part was realizing how easily people believed him. Neighbors left flowers on the porch. A few relatives sent condolence cards. Everyone accepted the story because grief is easier to accept than betrayal. No one thought to question the inconsistencies. No one came knocking to see the body. It was easier for them to nod, to say, "Poor man, he lost his wife," and to move on with their lives. And while they moved on, I sat in the shadows, alive but invisible, a ghost haunting her own house. The night before the wedding, I sat in front of a cracked mirror and studied the lines of my face. There were more wrinkles now, more shadows under the eyes, but it was still my face, the face of the woman he had once promised to love. I thought about the vows we had exchanged, the ring he had slid onto my finger decades ago, and I wondered when those words had died. Had they rotted quietly in his chest over the years, or had he buried them deliberately the day he signed my death certificate? I could not decide which hurt more, the slow decay of love or the calculated murder of trust. And so I made a decision. I would not remain a ghost. If he wanted me gone, I would return louder, brighter, undeniable. I would not confront him in private, where he could twist the truth or beg for mercy. No, I would confront him in the most public way possible. I would walk into his new wedding, the theater where he thought his lies would be crowned with applause, and I would set the stage on fire. That is why, on that morning, I dressed not in mourning black, but in deep crimson, the color of blood, of defiance, of life itself. Every step toward the cathedral felt like a march to war. My hands trembled, but my heart pounded with a rhythm stronger than fear. When I reached those doors and heard the music inside, I paused for one breath, one last moment of hesitation. Then I pushed them open, and the world saw that the dead can return. You may think I should have been afraid, but what is fear to someone who has already been buried once? You may wonder if I felt pity for the bride, an innocent perhaps, but pity has no place when your very existence has been stolen. I came not to apologize, not to explain, but to expose. So here I stand, alive before you, telling my story with the raw edges still bleeding. And I ask you this, if you were in my place, if the person you loved most had forged your death and replaced you with another, would you sit quietly in the shadows, or would you walk into the light and demand the world to see you breathe? Because I promise you, this is only the beginning. The wedding was just the stage. The real battle was yet to come. The first time I held the paper in my hands, my fingers shook so hard I could barely read the words. Certificate of death, my name, my date of birth, and a date of death that was not mine because I was very much alive, heart beating, breath shallow with disbelief. The clerk at the city office had printed it for me after double-checking his screen. His nervous smile told me even he did not know how to explain it. "Ma'am, maybe you should talk to your family," he had said, as if I were a confused widow who had lost her mind. I left without answering, the document folded into my purse like a snake coiled and ready to strike. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and unfolded the paper again. The lamp cast a weak yellow glow, and in that light the letters seemed to mock me. Deceased. It was not just ink on paper. It was an execution written in bureaucratic language, signed by my husband, witnessed by a doctor's name I had never heard of, stamped with a seal of the city. Every line was a dagger. How long had he planned it? How many lies had he told to make this official? The first thought that came to me was the insurance. We had a policy, modest but enough to ease someone's grief, enough to help him rebuild his life after my supposed passing. I had insisted on it years ago. Thinking of him, of the children, of security, I had thought it was love, but now I realized it was motive. He had not only written me out of his life, He had cashed me in. I could not sleep. I walked through the rooms of my house like a ghost haunting her own home. My eyes fell on every object that had once been ours: the sofa where we had watched movies, the framed photographs on the walls, the bed where we had shared decades of mornings and nights. All of it had been part of a story I thought was still being written, but in his version, it had already ended. I thought of calling my sister. She had believed the news of my death, sent flowers, written a note full of sorrow. How could I call her now and say, "I am alive, but my husband has declared me dead"? Would she believe me, or would she think the grief had driven her mad sister into delusion? No, I told myself, not yet. I needed proof stronger than my trembling voice. The days that followed blurred together, each one filled with a gnawing paranoia. I noticed the way the neighbors looked at me when I left the house. Some turned away, others whispered. One woman, Mrs. Lang, from across the street, stared openly, her mouth hanging slightly open as if she had seen something unnatural. It took me a moment to realize why. She had attended my funeral. She had stood among the mourners while my husband wiped fake tears from his eyes, and now she saw me, walking the earth. The corpse returned. No wonder she crossed herself as if warding off an evil spirit. I wanted to shout at her, to tell her I was not a ghost, I was a victim. But what good would it do? He had painted a picture so vivid that the truth looked like madness. I was trapped in a nightmare where my existence was both undeniable and disbelieved. One evening, I found myself drawn to his office in the house, a room he had kept locked more often in recent months. He was away, busy with his rehearsals for a new life, and I tried the drawer handles. Most were locked, but one slid open with a groan. Inside, I found letters, insurance documents, copies of medical reports with forged signatures. My stomach churned as I read words describing a long illness I had never had, hospital visits that had never occurred, a doctor's signature I could not recognize. He had built an entire history of my decline, page after page, as detailed as any biography, except it was all a fiction designed to kill me on paper. The moment that gutted me most was a receipt, dated weeks after my so-called death. It was for a deposit on a wedding venue, a grand cathedral downtown. The name listed as groom was his, and beside it was hers, the woman who now stood beside him in a white dress. He had not wasted time. The ink on my death certificate was barely dry before he began planning his new beginning. I pressed the papers to my chest, and for a second I could not breathe. My knees buckled, and I sat on the floor surrounded by the lies of the man I had trusted. It was not only betrayal, it was annihilation. He had not left me for another woman. He had killed me off to make space for her. That night, I lit no lamps. I sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old wall clock. Each sound was a reminder that life went on, indifferent to my personal tragedy. But inside me, something shifted. The shock was still there. The pain was still sharp, but under it, a coal of anger began to glow. If he could erase me with lies, then I could return with truth. I would not confront him yet. Not while he could twist my words, convince others I had lost my mind. No, I would wait, and I would gather everything. When the moment came, I would not whisper my existence. I would roar it into the world. I remember the night I saw the obituary. It was still online in the digital archives of the local paper. There was my photograph, the one taken at my daughter's graduation, cropped and framed in black. The words described me as a devoted wife and mother, lost after a valiant struggle with illness. I read it over and over, each sentence more surreal than the last. He had written my eulogy while I sat alive in the next room. He had declared my virtues with one hand while erasing my breath with the other. Have you ever wondered what people would say about you when you are gone? Most people never get to hear it, but I did. I heard the lies he told, the false grief, the convenient tragedy. And it hardened me, because if he thought I would remain silent, if he thought I would accept being buried alive, he was about to discover how wrong he was. That was the beginning of the escalation, the moment when I stopped being merely betrayed and began to fight. The paper said I was dead, but the fire in my chest told another story, and that story was only starting to unfold. The night I found the forged papers in his office was not the end of my discoveries. It was only the beginning. Once you glimpse the first crack in the wall, you start to see how fragile the whole house is. Lies are like termites. They eat away in silence until one day the structure collapses under its own weight. I could not sleep after holding those documents, not just because of the rage boiling in my chest, but because of the questions clawing at my mind. How deep did this go? Who else was involved? Could one man really stage an entire death without help? The answer came sooner than I expected. I was at the grocery store one morning, sunglasses pulled low, scarf wrapped around my head. I had started hiding my face in public, not out of shame, but out of necessity. Too many people thought I was dead, and their stares burned holes through me. I had just placed a carton of milk in my basket when I heard a voice behind me, tentative but familiar. Mrs. Warren? My married name. I froze. Very few people dared speak it anymore. I turned, and there stood a woman in scrubs, her hair pulled back, eyes wide with recognition. It took me a moment, but then I placed her. Hannah, a nurse from the clinic my husband used to visit. She had always been kind, the sort of person who remembered patients' names and offered a smile in the waiting room. Now her smile was gone, replaced by a look of horror, as if she had seen a ghost. "You're alive," she whispered. Her words made my skin crawl. Alive. It should have been obvious, but she spoke it like a revelation, like a secret forbidden to be said aloud. I grabbed her arm and pulled her into the nearest aisle, away from curious ears. "What do you mean by that?" I hissed. She glanced around nervously, then lowered her voice. "Your husband came to the clinic months ago. He brought papers, medical reports, signed consents. He said you were very sick, that you didn't want visitors, that you were in your last days. He wanted us to sign off on some documents for the insurance. I thought it was strange, but he was so convincing. And then, a week later, I heard you had passed. Now here you are, standing in front of me." My heart slammed against my ribs. "He forged everything," I said, the words tasting like acid. She nodded, guilt flashing in her eyes. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. But I did notice something odd. The doctor's signature on your file. It wasn't Dr. Patel's handwriting. I've worked with him for years. I thought maybe he had just rushed. But now I'm not so sure." The ground tilted beneath me. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a conspiracy stitched together with lies and stolen signatures. "Do you still have those files?" I asked, my voice shaking. She hesitated. "They should be in the system. I could try to get copies, but if anyone finds out—" I squeezed her hand. "Please, he's planning something bigger. He's not just stealing from me, he's rewriting my life. If you can help me, you won't just be helping me. You'll be stopping a crime." Her lips pressed into a thin line, then she nodded. "Meet me tomorrow, after my shift. I'll see what I can do." That night, I barely touched my dinner. Every sound in the house made me jump. I kept expecting him to appear at the door, to catch me mid-conspiracy, to drag me back into silence. But he never came. He was busy elsewhere, preparing for the grand performance of his second wedding. I imagined him in some tuxedo fitting, smiling at his new bride, rehearsing vows that were nothing but poison, dressed as poetry. The next day, true to her word, Hannah met me in the back parking lot of the clinic. She slipped an envelope into my hands, her eyes darting around nervously. "I could lose my job for this," she whispered. "But after what I've seen, I can't stay quiet." Inside the envelope were copies of medical reports. I flipped through them quickly, my breath catching at every page. diagnoses of late-stage illness, prescriptions for medications I had never taken, notes describing symptoms I had never felt, and at the bottom of each page, a shaky, clumsy imitation of my husband's signature pretending to be a doctor's. He hadn't even bothered to be careful. He thought no one would ever look. I closed the envelope and looked at her. "Thank you. You don't know what this means to me." Her eyes softened. "I do. Because when I heard you died, I cried. I thought it was unfair that someone like you, so full of life, could be taken so soon. Now I see you alive and I want to help you stay that way." Her words lodged in my chest like a thorn. Stay that way. She didn't know how close she was to the truth. He hadn't just buried me on paper. He had nearly convinced me to bury myself in despair. But now I had proof, and with proof comes power. I went home and spread the papers across the kitchen table. The lies stared back at me in black ink. I felt sick, but also strangely vindicated. For weeks I had doubted my own sanity, wondered if maybe I was imagining things, if maybe I was the one losing touch with reality. But here it was, undeniable. He had created an entire illness, staged a death, cashed in my life. As I sat there, the phone rang. I almost ignored it, but the name on the screen made me pause. It was Claire, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in months. I answered hesitantly, my voice low. "Rachel," she said, disbelief thick in her tone. "Yes," I whispered. Her voice broke. "But I thought you were gone. I went to your memorial. I held your daughter while she cried." My throat closed. "I know, that's what he wanted you all to believe." There was silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "Oh my God. He told us you had cancer. He said you didn't want anyone to see you in those last weeks, that it was too painful. I believed him. We all did. Rachel, what the hell is going on?" I looked at the papers scattered on the table, the lies laid bare. "What's going on?" I said. "Is that the man I married has murdered me on paper and stolen everything I ever built, and now he's marrying someone else as if I never existed?" Her gasp crackled through the line. "You can't let him get away with this." "I won't," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. When I hung up, the house was silent again, but the silence was different. It no longer pressed down like a coffin lid. It was the silence before a storm. I could feel the shift inside me. I was no longer asking why. I was asking how to make him pay, how to make the world see what he had done. I gathered the papers, sealed them in a folder, and locked it away. My heart pounded with a mix of terror and exhilaration. I had found an ally, a witness, a spark of hope. But I also knew that with every step I took, the danger grew. Because if he discovered that I was alive in more than name, if he learned that I had proof of his crimes, he would not hesitate to finish what he had started. That night, I stood at the window and watched the street outside. His car pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the walls. I ducked into the shadows, clutching the folder to my chest. He walked into the house, humming, carefree, the scent of cologne clinging to his suit. He kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't written me out of existence. And I smiled back, because now I had a secret of my own. You see, betrayal cuts two ways. He thought he had silenced me forever, but I was still here, breathing, planning, gathering. And the day would come when the truth would not just whisper in shadows, it would roar in the open. If round one was the moment I saw my own death certificate, and round two was when I realized he had co-conspirators in clinics and papers, then round three was where the weight of his lies came crashing down on me. Proof may have been my weapon, but at that stage I was still a soldier, surrounded, outnumbered, stripped of allies I thought I could trust. The deeper I looked, the more I realized how effective he had been in rewriting my story for everyone else. It started with my daughter. When I first dialed her number, my hands trembled so violently I could barely hit the buttons. I had rehearsed what to say. "Sweetheart, it's Mom. I'm alive. I need you to believe me." Simple, honest, the truth itself. But when she answered, her voice was cold in a way that shattered me. "Who is this?" she demanded. "It's me," I whispered. "It's Mom." There was silence, then a sharp laugh, bitter, disbelieving. "Whoever you are, this isn't funny. My mother is dead. Don't ever call this number again." "Please," I begged, choking on the word. "Look, I can prove it. I can meet you." The line went dead before I could finish. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the flat buzz of disconnection. My daughter, my baby. The girl I had raised and carried through fevers and heartbreaks had hung up on me, not because she was cruel, but because she truly believed her mother was gone. He had poisoned her so thoroughly with the image of a frail, dying woman that the sound of my living voice felt like a scam to her. That rejection cut deeper than the death certificate, deeper than the forged files. Because what is a mother if not recognized by her own child? I tried again a week later with my son. He was older, more skeptical by nature. Maybe he would listen, I told myself. But when I reached him, the words poured out too fast. "It's me. I'm alive. He lied. Please, you have to listen." He interrupted me with a voice so flat it sounded rehearsed. "Stop calling us. Dad said people might try scams using Mom's name. Whoever you are, you're sick. Leave us alone." Scams. That's what I had become in his eyes. A fraud. My own children, my flesh and blood, had been convinced that my voice belonged to a stranger. That was the moment I realized how alone I truly was. The neighbors did not help either. When I stepped outside one evening to get the mail, Mrs. Lang crossed the street to avoid me, clutching her dog to her chest like I carried a contagion. Mr. Green, who had once shared beers with my husband on the porch, muttered under his breath as he passed, "Poor woman doesn't even know she's gone." They whispered about me like I was an apparition, a confused figure refusing to accept her death. Every glance was suspicion, every whisper a nail in the coffin of my isolation. It was like watching the entire world close ranks around him, their sympathy cushioning him while I wandered the margins, invisible and unwanted. He had not just stolen money, he had stolen my identity, my credibility, the very relationships that tethered me to reality. The worst came at church. I hadn't stepped into the sanctuary since before all of this began, but I went one Sunday, desperate for some kind of anchor. The moment I entered, heads turned. Conversations fell silent. A woman I had known for 20 years clutched her rosary tighter, eyes wide with fear. After the service, the pastor approached me with the hesitant smile of someone handling a delicate case. "Rachel," he said softly, "we've been praying for your soul." "I'm alive," I insisted, the words raw, almost a scream. "Can't you see me? I'm standing right here." He placed a hand on my shoulder as if soothing a madwoman. "Grief can make us see what we need to see. Please find peace." I left that day with the sound of their hymns echoing in my ears, not as comfort but as condemnation. Even the house of God had no place for me. At home, the pressure built in silence. I ate little. Sleep was worse. Dreams turned into nightmares where I watched my children lay flowers on my grave while I screamed from beneath the dirt, unheard. I woke drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around me like shrouds. Every night, the same image, him smiling in a tuxedo, sliding a ring onto another woman's finger while I was sealed away in the ground. Sometimes I wondered if this was his true goal all along, not just money, not just freedom, but my slow disintegration. If he could isolate me, make me doubt myself, maybe he wouldn't need to kill me physically. Maybe he could simply let despair finish the job. And I almost let it. One night, I found myself standing at the cemetery, staring at a headstone with my name etched into it. Someone, him no doubt, had arranged it, complete with flowers wilted in their vase. Seeing my own grave was like looking into a mirror that showed only endings. I traced the letters with trembling fingers, the chill of the stone seeping into my skin. For a terrible moment, I thought about lying down on the grass and never getting back up, to surrender, to let his version of reality become permanent. But something inside me resisted. Perhaps it was spite, perhaps survival. A voice whispered, "If you lie down now, he wins." And I could not bear the thought of giving him that satisfaction. I stumbled home, weak, half broken, but still breathing. That was when fate handed me the envelope tucked behind a loose panel in the hallway closet, a place I had not cleaned in years. It fell when I tugged at an old suitcase. Inside were more documents, copies of insurance forms, withdrawal slips from accounts I hadn't known existed, even a letter to his lawyer discussing the transfer of assets after my unfortunate passing. It was the proof I needed, but it came at the moment I was closest to breaking. And that, in a strange way, gave me strength. I was done being the ghost at the edge of my own story. The storm he had created had battered me, isolated me, but it had not destroyed me. Standing in that dark hallway, the envelope clutched to my chest, I whispered a vow into the silence. I am not dead, and I will make the world see it. I thought I had already touched rock bottom when I saw my daughter reject my voice, when I saw my own grave carved in stone, but I was wrong. Rock bottom has many layers, and each one strips something more from you until you stand bare, with nothing left but the raw pulse of survival. Round 4 was that point for me. It was the night I almost disappeared for real. It began with a letter in the mail. At first glance, it looked ordinary, an official envelope with my name typed neatly on the front. For a second, I felt relief, finally recognition that I existed. But when I opened it, my heart stuttered. It was a notification from the bank, addressed not to me but to the estate of the late Rachel Warren. It informed me that the last of my savings had been transferred by request of my husband, acting as executor of my estate. Executor. That word burned into my eyes. Executor of my estate, while I stood in my kitchen, alive, reading the theft of my own money. I staggered to the chair, the letter trembling in my hands. My knees wanted to buckle. My stomach heaved. He had drained everything. Retirement funds, the savings account I had built since I was 20, even the small inheritance from my mother, gone. All under the seal of legality. Because as far as the world was concerned, I was nothing more than a name on a headstone. The walls of the house seemed to close in on me. This was no longer about lies. This was annihilation. He had taken my children's trust, my friends' sympathy, my neighbors' respect, my identity in the eyes of the law, and now he had taken the very roof over my head. Without money, how long could I hold on? That night, I couldn't breathe. I walked outside barefoot, the gravel biting into my skin, the cold night air slicing my lungs. I walked and walked until I reached the river. I stood on the bridge, staring down at the black water. The surface reflected the moonlight like shards of glass, a silent invitation. If I let go now, it would all end. No more fighting, no more lies, no more humiliation, just silence, cold and final. I leaned forward, gripping the railing, the metal icy beneath my fingers. The wind whipped my hair into my face. My mind whispered, it would be easier. Just let go. And for a moment, I almost did. But then, in that stillness, another voice broke through, my own, fierce and guttural. If you jump, he wins. The words echoed in my skull. He wanted me erased, and here I was about to erase myself for him. That realization lit a spark. My chest filled not with despair, but with rage. Rage that he had pushed me this far. Rage that he had convinced even me that I had no place in the world. I stepped back, trembling, sobbing, but alive. I stumbled home like a drunk, my feet raw, my body shaking. I collapsed on the living room floor and cried until my throat was raw. But these tears were different. They weren't the helpless tears of a victim. They were the battle cry of someone who had looked death in the eye and chosen to fight. The next morning, still hollow but breathing, I searched through the envelope of hidden papers I had found in the closet. Among the insurance forms and letters to his lawyer, I discovered something I had overlooked the first time. A receipt for a safe deposit box at the downtown bank, signed in his name, but with my documents listed as the contents. My documents. What documents exactly? My birth certificate, my passport, even the deed to the house, all listed there, locked away, as if he had put every trace of my existence in a coffin of steel and keys. My heart pounded as I traced the words with my fingers. This was it. This was why I had no voice in the system, why the clerk at the city office had declared me dead, why the bank had accepted his lies. He had stolen not just my money, but my identity itself, locked it away where no one could touch it. The knowledge crushed me and energized me at the same time. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, dizzying, terrifying, but also offering a glimpse of a way forward. If I could get into that box, if I could reclaim those papers, I would have the ammunition I needed. But how? My name was dead in their system. The bank would never give me access to a box that officially belonged to a ghost. For days, I paced the house like a caged animal, clutching that receipt, imagining scenarios. Each night, the nightmares grew worse. I saw myself trapped inside that deposit box, screaming as he turned the key and walked away. I saw the world closing in, suffocating me under the weight of disbelief. Then came the phone call that almost broke me completely. It was my sister again, the one I hadn't dared call after our first conversation. She called me this time, her voice sharp and brittle. "Rachel, I don't know what kind of sick joke you're playing, but it has to stop." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Your husband came by yesterday. He told us you've been harassing people, pretending to be Rachel, refusing to accept reality. He said you've been unstable for years. Do you know what that makes you sound like to everyone? A lunatic." "No," I whispered, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "It's him. He's the liar. I'm alive." "Enough!" she snapped. "I buried my sister months ago. Don't you dare call this number again." The line went dead, and this time I did not even cry. I simply sat in silence, the phone sliding from my fingers, the sound of her words echoing in the emptiness. A lunatic. That was the word he had given them, and they had swallowed it whole. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, my body rigid, my mind burning. I realized then that I was dangerously close to losing everything, not just my name or my money, but my sanity. When the world insists you are dead, when even your loved ones call you crazy, the line between truth and delusion blurs. I felt it slipping like sand through my fingers. But then I looked at the folder, the receipt, the papers scattered across my table. They were real. My hands could feel them. My eyes could read them. Lies might surround me, but the truth still existed in ink and signatures. And I clung to that like a lifeline. The climax of my despair came one stormy night. Rain battered the windows. Thunder rolled like distant artillery, and I sat alone in the dark, clutching the receipt for that deposit box. Lightning illuminated the room in violent flashes, and in those flashes, I saw my reflection in the mirror across the hall. My face was pale, hollow, my eyes sunken, my hair matted. I looked like a corpse. For a moment, I did not recognize myself. For a moment, I wondered if maybe they were right, if maybe I was already gone and this was some cruel echo of a life that once was. I walked closer to the mirror, my breath fogging the glass. "You are alive," I whispered, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "You are alive. You are alive." Over and over like a mantra, like a spell against oblivion. I pounded my fist against the dresser until the skin split, blood smearing the wood. The pain grounded me. The blood was proof, Corpses do not bleed. When the storm subsided, so did the madness. I collapsed into bed, exhausted, but with a new clarity. I had survived the grave once, and I had survived the bridge, and I had survived the poison of isolation. I could survive this too. And in the morning, as sunlight broke through the storm clouds, I knew what I had to do. The box was the key. Inside, it lay my identity, my existence, my proof. I could not let him keep it buried. Somehow, some way, I would reclaim it. Round 4 had dragged me through hell, torn away my sanity, and left me broken on the floor. But it had also burned away the last of my hesitation. There was no going back now, no surrender, no waiting for rescue. If I was going to rise from this grave, I had to dig myself out with my own hands. The morning after the storm, I felt different. Not healed, not whole, but sharpened. The despair had burned itself out, leaving behind a core of steel I didn't know I still possessed. I walked through the house barefoot, the receipt for the deposit box clenched in my hand like a talisman. For weeks, I had drifted between shock and despair, haunted by the belief that I was powerless. But now I knew something my husband did not. I had survived every attempt he made to bury me. And survival, I realized, is its own kind of weapon. I knew I couldn't do this alone anymore. My proof was strong, but proof is worthless if the world refuses to listen. I needed someone who believed in me, someone who could stand between me and the walls of bureaucracy that still listed me as dead. The name came to me suddenly, like a light in a tunnel. Daniel Weber, an attorney I had once met years ago when handling a property dispute for my late father. He had been kind, meticulous, and, most importantly, he had looked me in the eyes and told me, "People think paper is power. It's not. Paper is only as strong as the hands that hold it." I found his number buried in an old notebook. My hands trembled as I dialed, terrified he would dismiss me like everyone else. The line rang once, twice. Then a calm voice answered, "Weber and Associates?" When he came on the line, I wasted no time. "Mr. Weber, it's Rachel Warren. I need your help. I'm alive, but on paper, I'm dead." There was a pause, then a quiet inhale. "Say that again." And so I did. The words spilled out. The death certificate, the forged medical reports, the insurance theft, the safe deposit box. I spoke quickly, desperately, as if my very existence depended on his belief. When I finished, there was silence. I braced myself for the same rejection I had heard from my children, from my sister, from the pastor, but instead his voice came steady, measured. "Rachel, listen to me. You are not the first person I've seen caught in a web like this. Elder fraud, identity theft, false guardianships. They happen more than anyone wants to admit. What your husband has done is a crime, and not a small one. If you have the documents you say you do, we can fight this." My knees nearly gave out. I gripped the edge of the counter, relief flooding through me. "You believe me?" I whispered. "I believe what can be proven," he said, but his tone carried something else. Respect. "And if you're standing here talking to me, then you're not dead. That's proof enough for now." He told me to meet him the next day in his office, to bring everything I had. For the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. That night, I gathered the papers like a soldier polishing her weapons. The forged medical reports from Hannah, the nurse, the insurance letters, the letter from the bank, the receipt for the safe deposit box. I laid them out on the table, page after page of betrayal, and for the first time, I didn't cry. I studied them with cold determination, memorizing every line, every forged signature, every date. These were not just documents. They were bullets. And I intended to fire them. The next morning, I walked into Weber's office carrying a folder so thick it barely closed. The receptionist looked at me strangely when I gave my name, as if she too had heard I was supposed to be gone, but she said nothing. When Weber appeared, he looked older than I remembered. More gray at the temples, more lines around the eyes. But those eyes were sharp, unwavering. We sat across from each other, and I slid the folder onto his desk. He opened it, flipping through page after page, his brow furrowing deeper with every document. After half an hour, he leaned back, exhaling sharply. "Rachel, this is worse than you think. Your husband didn't just fake your death. He built an entire case to strip you of your rights. If he'd gone one step further, he could have petitioned a court to declare you incompetent, and then he wouldn't even need you gone. He'd have total control of everything while you were still alive." The room tilted. So, it wasn't just about money? "No," Weber said. "It was about power, about making you disappear one way or another." For a moment, fear threatened to crush me again. But then Weber leaned forward, his eyes blazing with quiet fire. "The good news is he made mistakes. Big ones. Forged signatures. Inconsistent dates. Missing witnesses. And now you've got a witness. The nurse who saw the papers. That's enough to crack this wide open. But Rachel, you have to understand, once we move, this will not be a quiet matter. It will get loud, messy, public. Are you ready for that?" I stared at him, my reflection faint in the glass of his desk. Was I ready? I thought of my children, my sister, the neighbors who crossed the street to avoid me. I thought of the grave with my name on it. And then I thought of him, smiling in that tuxedo, sliding a ring onto another woman's finger as if I never existed. My voice came out steady, stronger than I felt. "Yes, I'm ready." Weber nodded. "Then we start here. We'll secure affidavits from the nurse, from anyone else willing to stand up. We'll file motions to reclaim your identity, and we'll prepare for the inevitable. He'll fight back, and he'll fight dirty, but we'll be ready." When I left his office, folder clutched to my chest. The world felt different. The air tasted sharper. The light seemed brighter. For months, I had been a ghost drifting in shadows. Now I was a soldier walking into battle. The fear was still there, yes, but it no longer controlled me. It fueled me. That night, for the first time in months, I slept. Not because I was safe, but because I finally had a plan. Tomorrow the storm would begin, and this time I would not be swept away. This time I would be the one bringing the thunder. The night before the wedding, I made my move. I had avoided his eyes for weeks, played the role of the silent ghost in my own house. But the time for shadows was over. If he wanted me dead, if he wanted to erase me, then he would have to look into my eyes and see the truth he could not bury. I waited until he returned from one of his late appointments, still wearing that smug air of secrecy that clung to him like cologne. I heard his keys in the lock, the creak of the front door, the shuffle of shoes on the mat. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it would give me away, but I stayed seated at the kitchen table. A single lamp illuminating the papers spread before me. When he walked in and saw me there, his face drained of color. For a moment I saw fear flicker in his eyes, but it vanished quickly, replaced by irritation, then anger. "What are you doing up?" he asked, his voice clipped, as if I were an unruly child. I didn't answer. Instead, I slid one of the forged medical reports across the table. The paper rasped against the wood, loud in the silence. "Care to explain this?" He glanced at it, then shrugged, his mask slipping into place. "I don't know what that is." "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my voice cracking with months of bottled rage. "It's a record of my illness, except I was never sick. You forged it. Just like you forged my death certificate, just like you drained my accounts." His jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." I stood, my chair scraping back violently. "Don't insult me. I've seen the bank letters. I've spoken to the nurse who handled your fake papers. I know about the safe deposit box where you locked away my identity. And tomorrow, You plan to marry her in a church filled with people who think I'm rotting in the ground. Well, surprise, the dead wife is still breathing. His hand slammed against the table, rattling the lamp. You should have stayed gone. The words pierced deeper than any blade. Not even a pretense of love, no apology, no denial, just the naked truth. He wanted me erased. I leaned forward, inches from his face, my voice low and trembling. Why? Why wasn't destroying me enough? Why did you have to kill me in everyone's eyes? He sneered, a sound so foreign it chilled me. Because you were in the way. Because you clung to things that weren't yours to control. Because I wanted freedom, and you were dead weight. You were easier to love when you were gone. For a moment, the room spun. My chest burned, my throat tightened. Dead weight. That's all I had become to him after decades of love and sacrifice. But then, something inside me hardened. I straightened, my tears drying into fire. You may think you buried me, but tomorrow the whole world will see who's really dead. Not me. You. His eyes narrowed, a flash of panic breaking through his arrogance. What do you mean? You'll see, I said, gathering the papers into a neat stack. Enjoy your last night of freedom, because tomorrow your lies walk down that aisle with you, and I'll be there to tear off the veil. I walked past him, my shoulder brushing his as I left the kitchen. I could feel his gaze burning into my back. But I didn't look back. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the one shrinking under his shadow. He was the one left standing in the dark, facing the truth he couldn't control. In my room, behind the locked door, I pressed my hands against my chest, feeling the thunder of my heart. It was done. The battle lines had been drawn. Tomorrow, under the gaze of God and 100 witnesses, the war would begin. The morning of the wedding felt like the morning of battle. I dressed deliberately, not in mourning black, not in the muted grays he had tried to bury me in, but in deep crimson. Red, the color of blood, of survival, of truth that refuses to be silenced. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw not the ghost he had painted, but a woman alive, a woman ready to fight. The cathedral bells rang as I approached. Guests streamed inside, dressed in their finest. I slipped past them, unnoticed at first, until the heavy wooden doors swung open and the organs swelled. My breath caught. There he was, standing tall at the altar, beaming with pride. Dressed like a groom from a fairy tale, and beside him the bride, radiant in white lace, her hand curled around his arm. The sight nearly knocked me to my knees, not because I envied her, but because she stood there believing she was about to marry an honest man, unaware that she was placing her future in the hands of a murderer in disguise. I waited until the priest began the vows. The hush in the room was thick, the kind of silence that carries expectation. Do you, Martin Warren, take this woman? That was my cue. I pushed the doors wide and the sound cracked like thunder. Every head turned. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Some clutched their pearls, others whispered frantically, and a few even crossed themselves as if seeing a specter. For in their eyes, I was a ghost. I walked slowly down the aisle, my heels echoing against the marble, my crimson dress cutting through the sea of pastel gowns and dark suits. I could feel the eyes burning into me, the air thick with disbelief. The bride froze, her smile faltering, while my husband's face drained of color, his jaw tightening as if he'd swallowed poison. Stop the ceremony, I said, my voice steady, loud enough to carry, because this man is already married. To me. The wife he declared dead is very much alive. The silence was deafening. Then chaos erupted. Guests gasped, whispered, some stood to get a better look. Phones lifted into the air, recording. The priest stammered, unsure whether to continue or flee. The bride turned to him, her face pale. What is she talking about? He opened his mouth, but I was faster. I pulled the folder from my bag and raised it high. I have here the proof of his lies, a forged death certificate with my name, medical report signed by a doctor who never saw me, insurance withdrawals he made after cashing in on my supposed death. He buried me on paper so he could stand here today, pretending to be a widower ready for new love, but I am alive, and I will not be erased. Gasps echoed like gunfire. Someone shouted, "My God, it's true!" Another cried, "I was at her funeral." "Yes," I said, turning to the crowd, my voice rising with each word. "Some of you sent flowers. Some of you prayed for my soul. You mourned me because he told you to. But look at me. Do I look like a corpse? Or do I look like a woman who has been betrayed, robbed, humiliated, and now stands here to take back her life?" The bride's eyes filled with tears. She pulled her hand from his arm, stepping away. "Martin, is this true?" His face twisted, the mask cracking. "She's unstable," he spat. "She doesn't know what she's saying. She's been—" "Don't you dare call me unstable," I cut in, my voice booming. "You forged my death. You emptied my accounts. You convinced my children I was insane. And now you stand here ready to swear vows of love when you have already murdered love itself." I opened the folder and tossed the papers onto the marble floor. They scattered like snow, pages drifting, evidence spread for all to see. Guests bent down to pick them up, reading, passing them hand to hand, murmurs rising into shouts. The priest backed away from the altar, his face pale. The bride clutched the railing, swaying as if the ground beneath her had vanished. And my husband, my betrayer, stood frozen, his lies unraveling under the weight of truth. Then came the final twist, the one he hadn't expected. I turned to the bride, my voice soft but cutting. "He told you he was a widower, didn't he? That he had lost his wife, that he carried grief like a badge of honor, but it was all a lie. He didn't lose me. He tried to erase me. And if he could do that to a woman he lived with for decades, imagine what he would do to you." The bride's knees buckled. Two bridesmaids rushed to steady her, their faces pale with shock. The congregation erupted, shouts, gasps, the chaos of scandal exploding in a place meant for vows. I stepped closer to the altar, my eyes locked on his. "This was your stage, Martin. Your perfect performance. Well, consider the curtain torn. The audience knows the truth now, and there is no applause waiting for you." He tried one last defense, his voice rising with desperation. "You don't understand." "No," I said coldly. "They understand perfectly. The only thing left for you to understand is that the woman you buried is the one who just destroyed you." I turned then. Crimson dress flowing behind me, leaving him standing at the altar surrounded by whispers, accusations, and cameras recording every second. I didn't need to stay to see the rest. His downfall had begun, and nothing could stop it now. I hadn't even reached the cathedral steps before the whispers turned into shouts behind me. People weren't just stunned, they were outraged. Some guests rushed out with their phones held high, streaming live to anyone willing to watch. Within minutes, the lie that had been carefully built over months began collapsing like a house of cards in the middle of a hurricane. The first witness to step forward was Hannah, the nurse who had given me the forged files. She had been watching from the back of the church, too afraid until that moment to reveal what she knew. But when she saw the papers scattered across the floor, she pushed her way to the front. "It's true," she said loudly, her voice trembling but clear. "I saw those files. He brought them to the clinic himself. They weren't real. He made us believe she was dying when she wasn't." Her confession rippled through the crowd, turning disbelief into fury. Then came my sister. She had sat stiffly during the ceremony, still convinced I was some cruel imposter. But when she picked up one of the documents I had thrown, when she saw the forged signatures with her own eyes, her face crumpled. She looked at me, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Rachel," she whispered, and for the first time in months, she believed. She turned on him, her voice cracking. "How could you? How could you do this to her, to all of us?" The lawyer, Mr. Weber, had positioned himself near the front row, waiting for the right moment. He rose then, stepping forward with a calm authority that silenced even the loudest whispers. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you are witnessing is not madness or illusion. It is fraud. It is identity theft. It is insurance fraud, forgery, and abuse. And I can assure you, the law will not treat this lightly." His words landed like a gavel striking wood. The guests gasped, some backing away from my husband as if he carried a contagious disease. The bride, her veil trembling in her hands, stared at him with open disgust. "You told me she was dead," she said, her voice breaking. "You told me you loved me because you had lost her. All lies." She tore the ring from her finger and hurled it to the marble floor, the sound echoing through the cathedral like a final verdict. The fire spread beyond those walls. By the time I walked out, strangers in the street were already murmuring, passing along fragments of the story they had overheard. The dead wife came back. He forged everything. It's all over the internet. By the time I reached home, my phone was buzzing with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Friends, distant relatives, even my children, each one shaken, confused, some apologetic, some angry, but all finally aware that the story they had believed was nothing but a performance. That night, the news spread faster than any obituary ever could. Video clips from the wedding flooded social media, hashtags attaching my name to words like survivor, betrayed, alive. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid me now gathered at my gate, some ashamed, others eager to align themselves with the truth. I looked out the window and saw faces staring, not with pity, not with suspicion, but with something else. Recognition. It was no longer my private battle. It was public now, a spectacle, a scandal, a fire that couldn't be put out. And in that fire, I no longer stood alone. I had witnesses, allies, strangers who now knew the truth. The world had seen me walk into the cathedral in crimson and walk out alive. And once the truth is seen, it can't be unseen. The days after the wedding were like waking into a different world. For months, I had been invisible, a ghost wandering among the living, erased by lies and dismissed by those I loved. But now, the world could not look away. My story was no longer whispered behind closed doors. It was shouted in headlines, dissected on talk shows, debated in cafes. The wife who returned from the grave. Insurance fraud exposed at the altar. It was surreal to see my face, once framed in an obituary, now plastered across screens with the word survivor stamped beside it. The legal machinery moved faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, investigators knocked on my door, their badges gleaming in the morning light. They asked questions, took copies of the forged documents, listened as I told my story from beginning to end. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was screaming into the void. They listened. They wrote it down. And when they left, one of them put a hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll take it from here, Mrs. Warren. He won't get away with this." Meanwhile, my husband, or the man who had once been my husband, was drowning in the tidal wave he had created. The insurance company froze his accounts, the bank issued statements, and the police began their investigation into fraud, forgery, and attempted identity theft. Neighbors who had once shared drinks with him now refused to open their doors. The bride he had nearly claimed as his prize wanted nothing more to do with him. She gave interviews of her own, her voice shaking as she described how he had lied to her, how he had convinced her she was the fresh start he deserved. She wept on camera, but her tears were not for him. They were for herself, for the humiliation of being played as his final prop. And my children, God, my children. The first calls were hesitant, filled with confusion and shame. My daughter's voice trembled as she whispered, "Mom, I don't know what to say." My son was quieter, his silence heavier than words. They had believed him over me, mourned me while I was alive, dismissed me as a cruel joke when I reached out. I wanted to rage, to ask how they could doubt their own mother. But when I heard their sobs, something inside me softened. They had been victims too, poisoned by the same lies. "We'll talk," I told them gently. "But not yet, not until I've had time to breathe." In the community, the judgment was swift. People who had once crossed themselves when they saw me now crossed the street to avoid him. At the market, whispers followed me, but they were whispers of awe, not suspicion. "That's her. That's the woman who came back." I wasn't invisible anymore. I was undeniable. But the sweetest justice came not from headlines or whispers. It came from the silence inside my own home. For months, the walls had pressed in on me, filled with the echoes of doubt and fear. Now they felt lighter, as if they too had been freed from his lies. I walked from room to room, touching the furniture, the photographs, the memories. This house, once a prison, was mine again. Of course, he tried to fight back, through lawyers, through statements, through pitiful attempts to paint himself as the victim. He claimed I was unstable, that I had manipulated the situation, that the documents were misunderstandings. But no one believed him now. Too many witnesses, too many recordings, too much truth spilled in front of too many eyes. Every word he spoke was drowned out by the evidence I had carried into that church. 1 week after the wedding, the police came for him. I watched from my window as they led him to the patrol car, handcuffs gleaming in the afternoon sun. He kept his head down, his once proud shoulders slumped. I thought I would feel triumphant, that I would cheer as he was driven away. But what I felt was something quieter, deeper. Relief. The war was not over, but the battlefield was no longer mine alone. He would answer to the law now, not just to me. And in the quiet of that evening, as I sat on the porch with the summer breeze on my face, I realized something I had almost forgotten. I was free. Not just alive, not just breathing, but free. He had taken nearly everything from me, my money, my name, my dignity. But in the end, he had given me something he could never steal: clarity. I knew now exactly who he was. And I knew exactly who I still was, a woman who refused to stay buried. The day after they led him away in handcuffs, I woke up to a silence I hadn't known in years. Not the silence of absence, not the suffocating silence of being ignored or erased, but a silence that hummed with possibility. For the first time since this nightmare began, I did not wake up bracing for the next blow. I lay in bed, sunlight pouring across the sheets, and realized I was alive in every sense of the word. I made myself coffee, strong and bitter, and sat at the same kitchen table where I had once wept over forged papers and empty accounts. Only this time, the table didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like mine. I ran my hands over the wood grain, remembering the nights I had almost given up, the nights I had stared at the storm and thought of surrender. And yet here I was, stronger than I ever imagined, still holding the pen to my own story. My children came by that afternoon. They entered nervously, like visitors stepping into sacred ground. My daughter clutched a bouquet of lilies, the kind she had once placed on my grave. Her hands trembled as she set them on the counter. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me," she whispered. "I believed him. I believed you were gone." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You believed what you were told. We all did once. Forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about deciding not to let it poison the future." Her tears fell then, warm drops onto our joined hands. My son said little, but when he finally met my eyes, I saw the boy I once knew, the boy who used to run into my arms after nightmares. His lips trembled. "Mom," he said simply, and that was enough. Forgiveness would not erase the wounds, but it would stop them from festering. I chose, in that moment, to forgive, not for him, but for myself. and for the children who had been just as deceived as I was. The community's whispers shifted too. No longer did people cross themselves when I walked by. No longer did they avert their eyes. They greeted me with nods, with smiles, with quiet words of admiration. "You're stronger than all of us," one woman said at the market. Another murmured, "You're proof that lies can't bury the truth forever." I carried those words like armor, not because I needed validation, but because they reminded me that my survival had rippled beyond my own life. Weeks later, I visited the cemetery. The grave with my name still stood, cold and heavy. I placed fresh flowers at its base, not out of mourning, but out of defiance. "This is not my ending," I whispered to the stone. "This was never my ending." I turned and walked away, leaving the grave behind like an old skin I had finally shed. I began to rebuild, piece by piece, breath by breath. I stitched my life back together. The bank restored my accounts, the insurance company apologized, the legal system cleared my name. I bought new locks for the house, redecorated the living room, filled it with colors that spoke of life rather than shadows. I joined a community group, began volunteering at the local shelter, found myself surrounded by people who valued me not for money or status, but for presence and heart. And in the quiet of the evenings, I rediscovered myself. I pulled out the easel I'd tucked away for years, the paints gathering dust in the closet. I dipped the brush into crimson first, always crimson, and painted bold strokes across the canvas. At first, the lines were jagged, angry, but over time they softened into shapes of resilience, of renewal. Art became my confession, my way of saying without words, I am still here. Sometimes, when I walk past mirrors, I pause. I no longer see a ghost staring back. I see a woman who has walked through fire and come out alive, a woman who has been betrayed, humiliated, nearly destroyed, but who has reclaimed her dignity inch by inch, breath by breath. I see someone who refuses to be defined by what was stolen, but by what was rebuilt. Do I still feel pain? Of course. Betrayal leaves scars that never fully fade. But scars are not signs of weakness. They are signs that you survived, and I wear mine proudly. So here I am telling you this story, not because I enjoy reliving the nightmare, but because I know there are others out there, walking through their own storms, doubting their own strength, wondering if they should give up. To you, I say this: don't. Do not let someone else write your ending. Do not let lies, betrayal, or cruelty convince you that you are less than you are. You are alive, and that is enough to fight with. If you were in my place, if the person you trusted most buried you in lies and tried to erase your existence, what would you do? Would you stay silent, let the world believe their story? Or would you walk into the light, crimson and unyielding, and demand to be seen? I chose to fight. I chose to live. And in choosing, I found myself again. So if you've walked with me through this story, if you've felt the sting of betrayal or the weight of despair, I ask you, share your thoughts. Tell me what you would do. Comment below, because I want to hear from you. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories of survival, of truth refusing to die. Because the greatest lesson I've learned is this: true love never requires your disappearance, and dignity is worth more than any inheritance. Lies may bury you, but the truth will always find a way to rise. And when it does, you will discover, as I did, that freedom is the sweetest resurrection of all.